Hey, what's up? My name is Brent, also known as Purify Weird Soul. I'll explain that name later. I'm here to talk about some new things related to modern gaming that I've been thinking about and mulling over for a while. That track you were just listening to is a remix of the Bloodstained E3 demo level. It's called Voyage of Promise, and it's by Mega Driver. The album is called Metalvania. You should look that up if you like it. They have some really good stuff. My favorite song on there otherwise is Jail of Jewel from Portrait of Ruin. Do check that out. Anyway, I'm starting a new kind of a podcast series here just to cover some things that I don't think are talked about enough from my demographic specifically, being a 30-year-old person that still has time technically to play games, but I find myself more often than not just not playing games, and that's only partially because of how the games are. A lot of it is just not even life changes, but just mentally how I look at them and how they just affect my psyche. It's really hard to explain, but I'm going to try to get into that and kind of look at just the psychology of how I can start to play a game and how it's really tough for me to do that now. But also the trends in the market and this retro gaming craze that we have, and how I think a lot of that is missing the mark of what's important. First of all, covering that, the retro gaming thing, I think really is missing the biggest part, that it's not really about the graphics so much. The pixelated look of a game is nice. It calls back some degree of nostalgia, and that's cool and all, but it really isn't the core. It's not really the bread and butter of why we appreciate older games. A fine example of this would be the Dark Souls series and Bloodborne, and also games made by Platinum, such as Metal Gear Rising and Bayonetta. They have such a strong feeling of accomplishment that's missing from so many other modern games that focus more on a cinematic experience and being caught in moments and more of an epic adventure that you're undertaking, more than a stage-by-stage challenge or the feelings of accomplishment of learning how to do something. And it's not only just that. Another big part of the retro gaming thing that everyone's missing is how these older games were mostly achieving excellence through limitation. Because often the game was made good back then in spite of what it couldn't do, in spite of what was not possible, such as originally, Daisuke Ishiwatari originally wanted Guilty Gear 1, for example, to be more like Overture. His original idea for Guilty Gear was more kind of that war simulation strategy game. Castlevania and Mega Man 2, their vision and ideas for those games were not necessarily to make a two-dimensional plane jump and shoot in one specific linear direction, not being able to crouch, in Castlevania having very limited mobility options. The games became challenging and fun in spite of those things, to where the experience was kind of built around those limitations. Later on, they just improved upon it, and even though they couldn't build their initial vision for this, big, awesome experience they wanted you to have, it became more of a game. It was a very gamey experience, and I think that is a lot of what shaped my experience with games when I was younger, is having this more of a gamey feel to what I was playing. And now it's more of a simulation type thing, where you're going through something that's simulating something more realistic and rooted in logic and things happening because, well, physics say that yes, this should happen this way. Things now have more of a feeling of, this is the experience that we can make you have now because we have the technology, we have the resources, we have the money, we have everything we need to possibly put A, B, C, X, Y, Z, whatever we want into this game. Whereas before, they had what they had to work with, and they made the game that they could make. But in spite of those limitations, they really had the core gameplay of it really shine through, and we had these classics come out. And of course, a lot of games didn't make it that way. We lost several games along the way that, you know, may have had a future if they had performed as well as Castlevania or Mega Man, and were not able to shine through their limitations, and they were just limitations. But the point remains that newer games are focusing more on being an experience that is more like a movie. It's more of a spectating event that you get to participate in occasionally, more than playing out your own story instead of the story that they're telling you you're playing out. And I think that's really something that I miss from the older games, and it's really something that's missing from modern Final Fantasy games, for instance. And this isn't just about gameplay either. This extends even further into things like music. Those of you that are familiar with the 1990s Capcom games, they had a very distinct sound. Me and my brother used to call it Capcom music. And it was a thing you would know when you heard it. Like, this game has a Mega Man X sound to it. And some of the 90s fighting games from Capcom had that same kind of edge to it, that you would hear it and you would know it. You're like, oh man, this is Capcom music. You know, you get hype over that because it's really cool. Everybody knows the Storm Eagle song from Mega Man X1. You got Armored Armadillo. You've got the Street Fighter 2 stages, Ken's stage. I mean, Cammy's stage is my favorite from that game. Every song from Alpha 2, I mean, you hear that and you're like, oh, this is great. X-Men vs. Street Fighter, oh, those are just awesome. And they have a unique sound to them. But now that the limitation has been removed and all of these companies have access to these full orchestras and these, you know, modern tools and everything that can be synthesized, at least, to sound real, you would think you would have more variety, but there's been less variety because everything now sounds the same. Everyone has the access to the same sound. Everything is kind of an epic score, an orchestra. It's more of an ambient noise than a specific personality that's unique to that game or unique to that company or unique to that era. It's gone from being a unique Capcom game sound or a unique Konami arcade game sound, or, you know, the way the Genesis sounded or the NES sounded, or, you know, the early PS1 games, all of those. It's gone from that to being everything being, you know, an X amount piece orchestra recorded by the London Philharmonic, or, you know, recorded in Japan by XYZ Orchestra, whatever. And I think it's really undervalued, the essence and the power of game music. It's really a shame that it doesn't have its own unique identity as much as it did back then. And I think that's part of why the game music community, as far as making remixes and kind of doing their own thing, has risen up a bit, because the uniqueness of game music has been diminished and kind of formed into a sameness now, where if you play a game, a current big game, like something that should be known for having strong parts in all categories, you think about Battlefield 1, you think about Titanfall 2, you think about like the current Tomb Raider and Uncharted games. I'm pretty sure all of those games have very high quality music. I'm sure they spared no expense on the pieces. I think they probably wrote very good pieces of music for those. But the experience as you're playing those games and listening to the music, you hardly ever separate out your listening experience and say, you know what, that game had really good music. I'm going to download that stuff and listen to it later. Even games like Dragon Age or Mass Effect, even things as far back as Mass Effect 1, you think about the games that have this music that's kind of in the background, is kind of an ambient experience, and that's cool and all, but the music part has been diminished to where I can't really listen to that stuff stand alone and enjoy it as a piece of music and attach it to my experience with the game and have that feeling, oh yeah, I remember this and this is, important to me, and it has a unique sound to that game that I can associate it with. Or is it just, I hate to use the word generic, because calling classical music generic is not really a thing that any of us should do, but just it having that kind of a general sound that you can't really attach it to your experience. It's like, oh, this is an orchestral classic piece that could be from any of 10 games from 2016. I don't even know. And this even extends to games like the Souls games, unfortunately. Bloodborne and Dark Souls have pretty strong boss themes. The themes in the Nexus parts, the hubs, those tend to be pretty good. And even Motoi Sakuraba actually composed the music for some of those games, and he's really good as far as a game composer. I love Valkyrie Profile and Star Ocean 2, for instance. But the game in general usually does not have a musical piece as you're going through it that you're like, oh, I can attach that experience to this song, and I can listen to that and kind of relive it and have that call back to mind those memories, and it be that important part of the experience for you. I think that's really missing, and it's really unusual to have that in a new game. But one strong example of that could be a game made by Platinum, for example, such as they have done with Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance and Bayonetta. Both of those games tend to have very strong sound pieces associated with them, especially the Revengeance boss fights, and everything in Bayonetta in general was pretty good. And the good news behind all this, not just the music, is that I think the indie scene, of course, understands this. They know what the deal is. I think about Bloodstained, of course, and just how important things like the art behind those games and the music are so important. You think about art and music involved in other video games and the development of them, and it's not really something that you look forward to in a AAA game or any other type of game, that you want to hear the music before the game is out. You want to see the concept art before the game is out. That's not usually a thing even for current fantasy games. For me, as much as I love the Souls games, the dark fantasy art is really cool. But I'm not usually as attached to the characters and the attractiveness of the experience as I am with Castlevania. And that's another thing. Like, it's almost like games are trying to hold back from being cool in a way, and I think that's really unfortunate too. Speaking back about Capcom, I think back to the 90s Capcom experience and how everybody was making these games it was almost like they were trying too hard to make them cool, but at the same time it was really neat, and I respected that. I still do. And what I mean by this is, you think about every late 80s, 90s Capcom hero, they pretty much all had spiky hair and sunglasses. Nathan Spencer, Murad Spencer from Bionic Commando, spiky hair, sunglasses. Captain Commando, spiky hair, sunglasses. Albert Wesker, spiky hair, sunglasses. I mean, Street Fighter 2010, spiky hair. Everybody had spiky hair, and everybody had some damn sunglasses. It's partially because those two things may be easy to model into sprites and be kind of, like a cop-out for doing eyes, and maybe it's an easy hairstyle or whatever, but I like to think they're trying to make some cool, badass characters. And it's almost like that has been put on the back burner now in favor of embracing more of a middling, kind of a diverse experience, and I can respect that. I think that's important too, but I also like to see just some cool characters doing cool stuff. Give them some sunglasses, put some spiky hair on them. That's cool. That's fine. We still like that stuff, and I think they should focus more on just the fun of the game. Now, mobile games is another thing I wanted to talk about, and it's kind of a thing that I've gotten more used to. I actually play mobile games now more than console and PC games, because and part of this relates to what I wanted to get into about my psychology as it relates to playing video games. I don't know what else to call it, but kind of my outlook or mindset into this, because I get home from work, and most often I think about playing games at work, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this when I get home. I'm going to start this game, or I'm going to finish that, or I'm going to make some progress in XYZ. And I get to my house, and I'm like, you know what? I don't feel like doing anything. It's like I need to work up to rewarding myself to get that experience. Like, I feel like if I just turn the game on and start playing, it's not going to mean enough to me. Like, I have to work up to it. I don't know if that's something to do with me feeling responsible or what it is, but I just, even if nothing else is going on and I'm just bored, I feel like a lot of times I don't want to play a game. I probably shouldn't do that. And it's really strange because, well, for me, honestly, I have never been able to play a game for much longer than like 2 to 3 hours at a time. Even when I was, say, 8 years old to an older teenager, even when I was really into video games and having a great time, not participating in anything else, I would get home from school and just play video games, and that was about it. I still wouldn't play any longer than that, and I've never been able to just grind a game and just play it nonstop. I've never done that. And in my 20s, couldn't really do that either. So this isn't a huge change for me, but what I think it might also be is that as I've gotten older, I've come to understand more the meaning and importance of family, of having a good support system, of having closer friends. And I think maybe partially there's kind of this deficiency in the back of my mind that's there that may be preventing me from enjoying things more. Some people might call that depression. I think more than that, it might be my subconscious telling me, perhaps you shouldn't enjoy video games a whole lot. Perhaps you should look at getting more of these other things in your life in order. Because I've been working this whole time. And you normally, working and exercising, because that's just about all I do except play games and go to church. Normally those things would work me up to where, okay, I can reward myself now with a video game. But I think that's not enough now. Being in my 30s, the work and the exercise and, before, that would get me to where I could play a game. But now it's like that's not quite cutting it. I need to get something else going on so that I can, more or less get into the diversion of playing the game. Like, the diversion is not really substantial enough to occupy that much of my time now, I guess is what it is. And the thing that I think should be emphasized for the audience that would be listening to something like this, I just want to say that, when you're growing up, or even when you're in your later teens and 20s and 30s, your parents will talk to you and they'll say, we know you need to start a family, you need to have kids eventually, you need to get married, you need to do these things, you need to start a family. And I think that's important for different reasons than you might think it is. It probably is partially that your parents and your grandparents want grandchildren and great-grandchildren selfishly. That's probably part of it. They might want you just to have a partner so that you're not alone and all that, and that's cool too, but that's really not all there is to this. So I walk to work and back most of the time, and a lot of evenings when I'm coming home from work, I'll just be on the sidewalk and look to the left or to the right, and I'll see the lights lit up in the house, or I'll hear something from inside, like the children laughing and having a good time. Maybe I'll even smell their evening meal, or I'll just have kind of a fleeting sense of nostalgia, thinking back to when I was a kid sitting at the dinner table, eating with my parents and my brother. And at that time, I didn't appreciate the importance of the experience of eating together with those folks. My mom and dad, I think, did understand the importance of it. Mom sometimes had to force it to get dad, away from whatever he was working on, or if he was watching TV, she had to get me and my brother away from the NES or the Super Nintendo or the Saturn or the PS1 or whatever we were playing at the time, and get us to sit down and eat together and talk and just talk about our day. And I think that for my mom was important because it was symbolic of the holistic relationship that we had with each other, and just to have that kind of a reset, and to sit and to see each other and to share that moment daily where you're a family. And that's something that I think should be important to everyone, is to have people to come home to and to share your life with, and to have someone to bounce ideas off of, to have someone to support you, to talk to you, to be there in the good times and the bad, and to be family with. I think that is something that is actually something that should be focused on more than you need to have kids. You should have kids because everybody else has kids. That's not really what it's all about. It's really better for you than you might think it is, because not so much just your legacy or continuing your family or passing on names and all that kind of thing. That's, of course, part of it. But more than that, in even a selfish sense, you kind of need people home where you're going to after you've done whatever you do for the day. You need people there to do life with you. Because if not, you're kind of on your own. You're your own support system. It's you and whatever you believe in. And that's how I've been for the past 12 years. I've been on my own enough that I've gotten by pretty well. I'm a pretty independent guy. I can't drive because I'm legally blind, and that's had its own challenges, so I walk everywhere. And I've had God mostly as my support system, just in prayer and reading the Bible, especially in 2014, where most of the year, about 11 months, I was unemployed, and because I was laid off, and my mom died at the same in that same time period. So 2014 was really bad for me. I tried to refocus. I did lose a lot of weight around that time, and that was good. But through that, I could still feel like something was missing, even when I started working again, and things were getting back on track, seemingly. Because at that time, I had a pretty good job. This job is actually better than what I had working with Duke. I work for a company called Rex now, Rex Hospital, and I'm mostly doing the same kind of work, just with better people. But now my mom is gone. She passed away from breast cancer. My brother has been away in the military for quite a while now, since the year 2000. Currently, he's actually in Korea. He'll be back soon in May, actually, but it's kind of given me these thoughts that, okay, this isn't cutting it anymore. Just having the work, and being all right with that. Just having, my apartment. I'm doing well. I'm doing for myself. I'm independent. That's not really important to me now. I used to focus so heavily on being independent and doing things on my own that now I've decided, well, maybe that is not for the best. Maybe people really need each other to get through things. So often I push away or don't accept help and, want to kind of do more than I probably should for myself. And I think that has kind of come back to bite me now. And I did shut people out a lot too, because I was shy and very reserved when I was younger. I was, of course, insecure about several things: my vision, my weight, my hobbies. I mean, I didn't know anybody else hardly that played video games. So that kind of held me back in, a few regards. And on top of that, too, wanting to be independent on top of my disability, and kind of, I hate even calling it a disability, but of a slight disability, and trying to succeed in spite of that, and show my parents that, they didn't have to carry me. And in fact, they hardly had to do anything at all for me. My parents helped me get a washer and dryer when I moved out, and I paid them back within a couple of months. And now I actually help my dad more. I pay his cell phone, and I help him out whenever I can with taxes and whatnot. But it's really shown me that I really should refocus how I look at my life, because even when I'm at work now, I can't really focus and do well because I have this overarching just feeling over my head of what's the point? Like, what am I doing this for? Like, who am I supporting? Right? Myself? Like, why do I give a damn about myself? I don't give a damn about myself. This doesn't mean enough to me. There needs to be more to this. And that's not per se just a loneliness thing. That's a family togetherness thing. That's the family unit that's important. Having those relationships, I think, is really good for anyone to get through life, and not just for the support of having people to talk to, but just the fulfillment that goes beyond the children part of knowing you have a reason. You have a reason to do what you do. At the end of the day, if you have a bad day, even if there's no one to talk to there at the time, you know that there are folks in your life that know you well enough to understand what you must have had to go through today. And having those little moments of understanding, and having those dinners together, and having those conversations, even good or bad, those things can shape the way that you look at your life, eventually in a more positive manner, to where your children that you've raised can get to their point in their life where they look back at it and say, oh, that's why Mom wanted us to eat together at the table. It wasn't just so the food wouldn't get cold. It was so that we could have that moment that would shape our lives and our culture as individuals, and to be stronger people that understand the importance of relationships and the meaning of having family. So that's mostly what I wanted to cover, addressing a gamer. Like, I know so often you hear your older folks in your family say something to you about, well, you need to get a girlfriend, you need to go ahead and get started with your family, and you're just thinking it's kind of a selfish thing that they're looking at that for, or they just want you to hook up with someone so they can have something to gossip about. Sometimes that might be what it is. A lot of the times, that's probably the case, but more than that, I think we should refocus and look at the forest. Look at the forest instead of the trees, and take a step back and think about your experience as a child, and look at it more objectively than whatever, bad experiences or arguments that you might have had. And those arguments and those harsh words that you may have had, from or to your parents, those things in the end may have actually come out for the better for you in many ways. We are the people we are thanks to our parents. And more often than not, we can overcome whatever circumstance we were in to learn from it. If we had times that were good, that's great. We had a good time. If we had times that are bad, hopefully we can learn from that and kind of shine through it and show our family, by example, how we think it really should be. So that's mostly all of the sappy real life stuff I wanted to cover, and it's going to be hard for me to work on that. I'm still on step 1 or step 0, but I think a lot of folks probably need to hear that, because it's so easy to shut yourself in behind the distractions and the diversions and the excuses and say, well, women have hurt me, I don't trust them, or, kids are annoying, I hate children, I can't stand, this thought of, living with people, I do my own thing, I just get absorbed in my things, my possessions, my entertainment, my Netflix shows, my ice cream, whatever, whatever you're into. I think it's really important once you get around my age to refocus and look at these things. of course, after you've looked at them, then you have to take action, and that's where I'm at right now. I don't even know how to get started because I never got started when I was younger, right? I've gone from being how I'm just talking about to just now being, looking at what I can do because I've never been in a relationship, period. I mean, I have pretty good friends. I get along with people well. A lot of people think a lot of me, but I have never been able to really initiate any sort of intimacy. And again, that's mostly because of me holding myself back with the vision and the independence and the insecurity of thereof, plus the weight and everything. I most often actually avoid, even run from attractive people my age because I don't know how to handle those situations. Like, I feel like there's no correct answer to the situation, and I'll certainly avoid eye contact because I'm still a bit self-conscious about how my eyes look, because you can see one of my eyes is not looking straight ahead, like I'm not quite cross-eyed, but the pupils also kind of jump around a little bit. It's called nystagmus if you want to look it up. But anyway, the only other the only really close relationship I've had, period, was with my brother, and he's been gone for quite a while now. Now we just talk on, Facebook messaging chat, and when he's not deployed, when he's not on assignment in another country, I'll see him at most maybe one weekend every month or so, and on holidays for, a few days at a time. And what's interesting is that he seems to be in a similar situation. He's had relationships. They haven't worked out yet, but he's not married, and I don't think he has many close friends either. So I think he's kind of struggling with the same thing. And he's a pretty normal dude. Like, he looks fine. He doesn't have anything going on with his vision. He's a perfect vision, actually. But he is busy with his work. He is quite absorbed into what he does, and he's been very successful with that. He made senior master sergeant already, and he's got 3 years left for the Air Force. There's only one rank higher he can even go. So he's done really well. He's almost done with his degree, so he's doing wonderful over there. But I think he might be looking at kind of the same things that I am. Just about the importance of family and recapturing those moments of like those houses that you walk by and you see those lights, and you hear the family and you think, oh man, I used to have that, and it just now hits you like, okay, that's the important part. And I think that like my brother, a lot of people probably need to think about these things and hear it, and might be in the same situation where they get home and it's time to play a game, and you're like, well, I can't do it. I don't know why. I just can't really get myself to do this game right now. And I think that comes from a point possibly of your brain just subconsciously saying, okay, well, the work isn't enough now. If you want to work up to the experience of enjoying this game, maybe you have to catch up with having your family in line and having this sharing your life set to go, and having that part straight, so then you can enjoy these other things, then you can enjoy the distractions. And of course the challenge with that is, once you have the family, once you have those relationships, once you have all that going, do you have time for games then? And I think in those instances, if it's important to you, you'll probably prioritize it enough to make the time to play 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, of course, if you have one or two young children, if you have an infant and you have a wife and you have a full-time job and you have a house to take care of, that is a lot to ask. But you'll value those moments more when you have the opportunity to play the game, and it will mean more to you to be able to absorb yourself into the distraction, because then you feel like, okay, my life is straight, everything's in order, I can enjoy this and get out of it and have a good time and, feel good about everything, right? I think that might be part of it. It might not be. Maybe it's just that I'm bored and I hate all new games. But honestly, I do have a lot of older ones I haven't played yet. Anybody that hasn't gotten into Shovel Knight yet, you should probably do that. If you're not looking forward to Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, of course, that's also most likely going to be pretty good. From all indications, should be a great Castlevania game. So that about covers what I wanted to talk about with real life and all that. But now on to mobile games. I started to talk about these earlier, but then I started whining about my life situation. So to get back on those, it's interesting how mobile games have kind of grabbed our attention, and how unfortunate it is that so many of them use gambling or the gacha system or sex, aka waifus, to sell these games and to keep the addiction going. You have the gambling and you have the attraction of the characters that you like that kind of just goad you into keep playing the game, keep getting more, keep doing stuff, keep signing in every day. Even if you don't play the game, you got to get your sign-in bonus, right? Like, you're not losing anything except time, but goodness gracious, you can lose a lot of time and not really accomplish anything. It's almost the opposite of what I was talking about with a Souls game or a Platinum game, where you have that, okay, I've done this and I got this handled now, I've learned something. Most mobile games do not have a feeling like that. You're doing the same thing constantly. And I've played enough Puzzle and Dragons to know that game is a little different at high level, because you have some really challenging things, but like all the other ones, to achieve that level of play, you have to either drop a lot of money or have already played the game daily, and a few hours daily since it came out, for years to even approach that part of the gameplay. And by that time, you have to ask, well, was it really worth the investment I made? And to some people it is, to some people it isn't. To my friend Doug, he really enjoys the gameplay, and he likes the characters more than I do. And I like some of the crossovers it has, but it's just usually not enough to keep me engaged enough to where I feel like I should keep playing. What's also really unfortunate is that a lot of these more casual games, if you notice, these match 3 games or these puzzle games, quite often have things like a bubble popping sound, right? And that sound is kind of an addictive, like, audio cue for us. Like, it sounds like stress relieving. Like, it's kind of like maybe it releases endorphins or something, because people like to puff the bubble wrap, right? It's kind of that same thing. So it's kind of like in the back of your mind, oh yeah, I'm just going to hear this noise again and keep doing this. It's addictive in a very subversive, subtle way, and it's kind of dark and kind of I don't want to say evil, but it's really kind of underhanded when you put these things together. Like, you have the addictive bubble popping sound gameplay. You've got the gambling part with achieving these goals of having XYZ characters or powers or whatever it is in that game. Plus you have the characters that are dressed provocatively, or this waifu or this husbando that you want to get in your game. You add all those things together and you've got this giant sadness. Like, it's just really rough, man. Like, and what's also really bothering me too about something related is the Patchaslot and pachinko machines over in Japan. The recent Castlevania erotic violence machine. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can Google Castlevania erotic violence, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But they took the established characters of the Castlevania franchise and put them in a slot machine. Richter and Dracula, Succubus, and all that. And the selling point is like how sexy all the females are. And this is extra sad because Castlevania has nothing else going on right now, and they're using the coolest characters to me. I love Richter, and putting him in this situation, and it's just so disappointing on a deep level, because largely because I know there's a lot of guys like me, my age over there in Japan, that are stuck in this same real-life scenario I was just talking about, that are going to these slot parlors and putting their yen into these machines, and this is the way they're filling the void of not having this stuff to enjoy anymore. They don't even have an actual game to come home and play. They get off of work, they're, like a 30 or 40-something salaryman, they go into the slot parlor, and that is how they're answering their troubles. Like, they're trying to fulfill this deficiency with this gambling, erotic, violent game that they maybe can accomplish being able to do more erotic, violent gambling. That is so disappointing. It's really rough, like, that they won't be able to achieve anything from that, and the only thing that might come of it, if it goes well for Konami and for them, is that they get more of them made. I'm really salty about all that in general, about how video games have come to this point where you have the mobile market and the gambling markets, and how Konami is so heavily into the gambling now and the mobile, and how it's all kind of come to be. But how also I find myself playing those mobile games because it's so simple and so easy that you can play it for 5 to 15 minutes a day, and it's enough where you can get like a bite-sized piece of gameplay. And it's nice because you don't have to turn on the PS4 and download 3 updates and install the updates and check for the DLC and wait for the game to install. And then you have the day one bugs that you have to worry about, and all these other issues with modern games that make it so that your 5 to 15 minutes that you could have played your mobile game, you're probably going to spend a couple of hours just starting another game from scratch like you just got. So that's another part of modern gaming that I just really think needs to have another look taken at it. I think Nintendo has been better about this compared to Sony and Microsoft. I think that Nintendo is still a little bit more about turning the machine on and playing a video game. The Ps4 experience, in contrast, I like Sony more than Microsoft in general. I don't have an Xbox One because there aren't any games I want to play on the Xbox One, but in general, I'm more of a Sony fan right now as far as consoles. But that being said, I think the Ps4 Console Experience is garbage. I think that the way you sign in with your profile and then have someone, accidentally sign in under the profile that you had and then had to go back into the menu and reassign the profiles, but you can't sign in on one for a tournament unless that one is logged in, so you sign in as the wrong one, and everybody has a wireless pad there except, a few people with arcade sticks, so you have to turn off all the wireless pads because they're still synced on, so somebody can't hit the home button and screw up the match on the screen. And of course you have all these other nonsensical things that are tied into the game with accounts and having all this other crap on the menu bar, and it's just a pain in the butt. It's so much more than games need to be, and I think that relates back to the experience aspect I was talking about earlier on in this conversation about how we've lost sight of video games just needing to be video games. I understand people wanting a multimedia experience from their console. They want to watch Netflix. They want to, I guess some people listen to music. I don't think people actually use that stuff, but those things exist. I see people on Netflix all the time on PS4. For some people, maybe it's just a streaming device or whatever, and that's fine, and I can't blame them for using it for that. But there's so many other avenues that you can do that, and any device nowadays can stream Netflix. I mean, it's not an unusual thing. If you drop $300, $400 on a PS4, I think you should be looking at it mostly as a machine to play video games. And hopefully, we can come to a point eventually that you can turn the game on and be playing it within at most 5 minutes. The install process, getting your DLC in line, getting the updates straight, making sure your controller works, hopefully not having to worry about things like settings, input delay. Maybe that could not be as much of a thing now. We didn't have to worry about any of these things 10, 15 years ago. You started the game and it worked. At most, you had to have a memory card, and that was about it. I think it's really cool that Nintendo is going back to cartridges. I like SD cards. I think they're cool. Hopefully that works out well for them. I hope the Switch does pretty well. I mean, I may not get one for another 2 years, but I think the health of Nintendo is important for the gaming market, because I think they represent a Japanese innovation part of the gaming industry that needs to be represented. Because if everything goes full on Western development, where they make everything casually marketed in the West, it's gonna get more and more, epic experience, orchestral soundtrack, quick time event, watch a movie that you can occasionally participate in, that kind of thing. I think the gamey innovations that Nintendo brings to the table, even if they're not always successful, I think it's important that they try. And they have, of course, the best, hands-down, first-party experiences of any console has ever had. I mean, Sega's old games would probably be a second place for me. Of course, Sonic was great, but Mario and Zelda and Metroid, and Fire Emblem, you can't really beat those franchises as far as first party. As much as I like Sony, I don't give a damn about any of Sony's first party games. I never have. And I know some of those are good, but they're just not what I'm looking for. So, what is the answer to all of this? How does Nintendo play into it? What do we do about all this? Is there anything the industry can do to kind of bring this back for more casual people to be interested, for more of the older crowd to be interested? What can they do? I think you could just look at the success of the NES Classic and clearly see that people really value this retro experience, not entirely just for the graphical attraction of the 2D pixel art. That's not all there is to it. Even if that person can only vocalize that part being important to them, and them just kind of being what we would say a retro hipster, even if they don't realize it, I think the strong design, the excellence through limitation of those games, they on some level appreciate and know that. And it's not just the two-dimensionalness of the graphics that's great. It's the gameplay and how great things were, in spite of not having a jump button in Bionic Commando's case. That game was excellently made. It's really fun. I can beat that in one setting. It's really a pretty fun game. It's great, but you can't jump. You can't jump at all. You have to use the grappling hook, and I think that's an interesting, fun dynamic that you would not see in any current video game. Samus can shoot in almost any direction, and Mega Man can only shoot straight forward. What is that all about? Like, you didn't hear people complain about that much back in the day, because those games were built around those considerations to where you could play it and have fun and not realize that piece was missing, because it's not part of the game experience. You're enough absorbed into the fun and the challenge of it that you're not bothered by not being able to do X. You play as Ryu in Street Fighter 2, and you wonder, well, this guy is jumping my fireball. Why can't I shoot a fireball up in the air? Well, that's because the game isn't made around that kind of consideration. It's easy to look at a fighting game that way, but I think single-player games can be looked at that way too, because it shouldn't just be about, I want to experience this game, being able to do whatever I want in the game. that's not what should be important for enjoying a game, in my opinion. What should be important is enjoying a game on the user side of overcoming a challenge and learning something and becoming better at something, accomplishing something, like a game that's not a video game. Say you're playing a board game, say you're playing a word game, say you're playing any type of game otherwise. And on the developer side, overcoming the limitations by just being a really strong game developer, not so much a technical achievement of whatever other aspect of the game might look or sound or, play out well cinematically or filmography or any of that stuff. That stuff is cool, but if the time and money is focused around allowing the programmer, the game developer, to be able to really shine on what they're good at programming game-wise, to play to their strengths, to the type of games that they're good at developing. If that is at the forefront of the experience, I think that's where games can really be much more of a satisfying experience for all involved. Unfortunately, I think part of the issue is how the market for games has not really adjusted well. If you think back to the early 90s, me, my brother, and my cousin, I remember having this discussion with them actually around the dinner table. It was earlier in the day, I believe, but we were talking about saving up $80 for the Super Nintendo copy of Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. It was not uncommon for games to be more expensive back then, to be around $60. $60 back in the early 90s to mid-90s, that was a lot more money than it is right now in 2017. The price of games has not increased in quite a long time. The price of video game consoles has not really increased either. So our expectations of getting a full game has not changed either, though. So I think that's a lot of the reason why we have things like DLC and patches and fixes and whatever, because they can't realistically provide a game at that price point, especially when you have teams that are way bigger than they were in the Super Nintendo days. When you think about Final Fantasy IV, and the size of the team that had to make that game compared to the size of the team that made Final Fantasy 15, that is so much different. It's mind-boggling to consider the technical work, the money, the manpower, the years that went into 15 as compared to Final Fantasy 4. Now, to expect a game to release and be good and be finished and only expect to drop, the initial price on it is kind of preposterous, honestly, if you take a step back and think about it. We expect a lot as consumers. We really do. We think we deserve the best, and, the producers know that stuff. The people putting the games out, they understand that they can't ask that much more of us because that's just how the market is. But it's mostly unfortunate for the game developer themselves, the people actually sitting behind the desks, writing the code, drawing the models, and, grinding the stuff out. They can't meet the deadlines realistically. It's just completely unfair to them because this trickles down to their level where up top they tell them, we need this game done so we can release it and not even break even on this $60 price tag, and then hopefully keep people interested enough that they can care about getting DLC so we can maybe make some money on this game that took us 7 years and 3,000 people to make. I mean, that's just the reality of it. So in this culture, in this environment, in this scenario, you have the indie developers that are more or less kind of like the game development companies that we're talking about back in the 90s, where they're much smaller and they can focus on the game experience and they can focus on having that unique game sound, and they can focus on the retro pixel art graphics. They can do those things, and they can get away with those things because they're not looking at the 7 years and the 3,000 people to make this game and to hopefully one day make enough money on it to be fiscally viable for the company and not have to just resort to patch slot machines and actual slot machines and mobile gaming. It's a struggle. I look at Konami as a company, and I can't entirely blame them for their shift in priorities for making money because they're a company, but still can't really condone what they've done to their franchises. So there's definitely a few sides to that. But anyway, yeah, I think that indies are the future. I think that it's much easier for them to focus on and to highlight what's important in the gaming industry. And I didn't give indie titles any attention until quite recently with games like Shovel Knight or Shantae and other, really good shining examples of what an indie game can be. I thought they were mostly just kind of amateurish, kind of a rushed, hobby type thing where a lot of times you see just a really Atari-looking, mushy pixel graphics where you wonder if they're just, cashing in on this retro gaming craze and all this. And but now I have seen the light. I think there's a lot of hope resting in those people. I think that they can really turn things around for a lot of us, especially people in my demographic that are still looking for those challenging, rewarding, fun experiences with cool characters and having music that's unique that you can recognize, and the art of older games, and not just visually the pixels of them. So best case scenario, we have more work put out by that done with From Software, like Platinum Games, and indies can really have more of a space where they can shine. I think that would be the best possible scenario for us, and hopefully these older franchises that we really need to see new entries for, hopefully From Software or Platinum Games can acquire some of these licenses, because Platinum's been all about making a lot of random licensed games. So if they could make a Castlevania game, or if FromSoft could make a Castlevania game, the same thing with, the Mega Man franchise, any of these bigger, older Japanese companies that are still big but don't make their own video games, pass them on. Pass them on to Platinum, pass them to From, give it to Yacht Club Games even, give them to Way Forward, Any Creates, I don't know, just someone that understands how to make a video game a video game. And, well, speaking on graphics, I do think I should talk about the 2D graphical style for video games and talk more about why I think people enjoy it that they may not realize. There are spots in a video game, in a 2D video game, where you're looking at the background and you can't completely tell what's back there. Your imagination has to fill in some of those spots. Like in Symphony of the Night, when you're starting the game, you can see outside the windows, you can see a storm. In some levels, you can see the peeping eye, floating by. Inside the castle, you can barely tell what some things are going on outside. And even in the assumed foreground and the background, you can see and tell some things are going on, but you can't exactly get a feel for exactly what's lurking in the darkness. What is around there, and your imagination can take that and run with it and really fill in those blanks. And even if you're not cognizant of yourself doing that, I think while you're playing the game, you're kind of lost in that environment. And if you compare that to a 3D game, you can see everything around you. Your imagination doesn't have anything to fill in. You can see the entire game world in all of its polygonal blockiness. Like you can look around outside. More often than not, it feels more constrictive than it actually is because there's less to wonder about. Even if you're not running in a straight line anymore and you can run in 3 dimensions, more often than not, you're contained in a singular space that you can see everything in. Like you're kind of trapped in this circle that you can run around in until you go to the next screen, and then it's another box or another circle. And what ends up happening is you feel like there's less around you because there's just that much less to imagine. If the budget was mostly spent on the textures, the appearance of the game, the resolution it runs in, the frames per second that it runs in as well. If the character models, are really, spot on and look amazing. If the graphical budget is all spent on that, the things that you can see clearly, that leaves so much less for the mind to wonder about when you see a drawn landscape, a 2-dimensional artwork basically that has so much more going on, drawn by hand, that you can see, okay, I wonder what's going on with that. Is that going to be part of the game? Is that part of the lore? Is that just kind of a background piece? Is it just kind of there? All those kinds of things are questions that you can, take in as you are casually playing the game. Whereas otherwise, in the modern game, most of those questions are answered. And a lot of times if the question isn't answered in-game, it doesn't take long on Google or YouTube to find out. That's another inherent weakness of modern gaming, how there are no secrets anymore. Everyone knows everything about everything, a lot of times even before a game is out, because they've already seen it, they've already researched it, they may have already even seen the full walkthrough before they consider buying the game. But that's neither here nor there. So anyway, to take the comparison further, to put it into more common terms, you think about the book versus the movie, right? Or the manga versus the anime, if you will. An adaptation that goes from the written and drawn form to the realistic 3D form of everything being filled out for you. Like the story that you had kind of filled in the blanks for, and the experience that you had kind of assumed for yourself as you were enjoying it, as you were reading it and digesting it in your mind, and how your mind's eye could picture the awesomeness of how you wanted to view these things in your mind, that cannot compare to one person's limited, exploration of that on screen, as they see it and as they are able to portray it with their limited amount of time, with their limited budget, with their finite resources of putting it on the movie screen, on the TV screen, or, in the video game. And isn't that an interesting piece of irony there, that even though I was just talking about how the modern day gaming company doesn't have to worry about the limitations of old, they do have this limitation of not having the luxury of the user's imagination as they did back in the day, and that is a weakness, that is a limitation. That's kind of ironic. So having that imagination part missing from the experience makes the experience inherently weaker, because what we can think in our minds as part of our imagination as gamers while we're going through this fantastical experience, that is going to trump seeing it in-game in full 3D with no detail uncovered, where the mystery is gone, where the love of the fantastical elements is kind of diminished when there's less for you to fill out that you want to believe is there, that you want to fill out how you interpret it and how your mind wants to enjoy it. The opportunity for that isn't as much there, and I think that's a large part of why most people that are into an original form of media, in its written form, in its drawn form, in the original book or the original manga, that's part of why they can't really get as much into the movie or the anime version or the 3D version of the game, is because there's so much that their mind may have filled out there that may have not even been an original intended part of the experience, but it was important to them because it was what they pictured in their mind as they were going through it. And I think a lot of times that is the author's intended purpose for, or maybe not the purpose, but a welcome side effect of the experience to the user is being able to picture those things. And some authors are very descriptive in how they write their stories, and they have very specific details. But even with that, you're kind of filling it out in your own mind, and you can give your mind the best visual version of that as you choose to experience it for yourself. So, not entirely fair for the movie or for the anime adaptation. I think those should be enjoyed for what they are, for sure. And I think that's important that we still make those adaptations. But in the context of video games, two-dimensional versus three-dimensional, I don't think it should be missed that the two-dimensional is still important, which mostly seems to be missing. And a game now can just start out 2D and stay 2D, and I would be fine with that, and I think a lot of people would be fine with that. The thing is, it's not as easily marketable, just like the books and just like the mangas, because so many of us out there are busy with those families I was talking about, where it's hard to enjoy something that takes more of a time and a mental investment to read the whole book, as opposed to watching the hour and a half to 2 hour movie. And I understand that, but the two-dimensional market and the imaginary market shouldn't be left behind. And I think it's really important for younger gamers to get into the two dimensions too, because their imaginations are that much stronger, and it will be easier to inspire them to keep the ball rolling so that they can enjoy those experiences like we did, that they fill in those blanks, and they understand when they get older the importances of those older forms of media where you can really set your mind to that environment and that experience and fill it in as you will and have that much fun with it. I think it's great for younger people to have those game experiences, and it's really cool to see a lot of these families now picking up the NES Classic, and I think that's part of the reason they might be doing it. Even if they don't realize it, that's a great thing that can come about from this, is younger people, getting into these older games and thinking, oh wow, I can't really tell what's going on back there. I wonder if, X thing in the background has a story behind it, and the game really hasn't given me a background story for what's going on with these characters. Like, there was just like an intro screen, and I just started playing. I wonder what's going on between these playable characters. What kind of relationship do they have? Like, how is this story unfolding? I'm just playing this level and things are happening. Nobody's telling me what the story is. I think that that's important for younger folks to have that experience, because their imagination is so strong and they can fill in those details like that. They're just there. They're all over it. So I think it's great that we can keep that alive, and then they can get older and be the age where they can keep it going with making those games, because it would be almost like, otherwise it would be almost like not having books, not having manga, where you just have movies, you just have anime. You don't have the very thoughtful, the very imaginative experiences that a hand-drawn human expression 2D experience provides in comparison. So anyway, you can probably tell I'm a pretty big fan of the 2D side of things. I think it's just as important as, not forgetting the importance of a hand-drawn artwork, of, the written word, things like that, just the very organic artistic expressions that we do as people. I kind of liken it to that, having a 2D fully handmade game with not like all the automated tools that we have now. I extend the same thoughts towards music, because you have all of these auto-tuned and synthesized songs we have now. Everything is very produced. It's very the sound is very forced. It's not live instruments usually anymore, to the point where you have a lot of these performers that struggle to play their music live, let alone flourish live, which is how I usually gauge how much I like a band, is if they can sound as good or preferably better when they're performing live. That's important to me. Most of the old rock and metal bands that I'm into, they're better when they're playing in front of an audience. The experience is better than listening to it at the house, I think that extends to several forms of media. We can't forget the power of the human expression like that, and not let the machines rule even our entertainment. Although, we have had some really cool advancements with that, and we should not abandon those. We shouldn't throw Hatsune Miku in the trash. We should probably keep using that, as, strange as that may be. I think that's a really cool thing, too. So, you have VR, you have, holographic technology, you have all these 3D tools, Bloodstained itself, using procedural generation for a lot of the game. Some of that stuff is just necessity now. But at the same time, we have to find that balance. I guess I'll wrap up this topic now. I've talked about this long enough. I think you get my point. Whoever's listening to this probably agrees anyway. So, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about for this first episode of this podcast, I guess you could call it, or Puricast, whatever I'll end up calling this thing. And definitely shout outs to my friend Mike, Zombie Mike, who started the Bloodstained community broadcast, because that was a big part of the inspiration for me to start doing this whole thing. So thanks, Mike. I appreciate all you've done, and I'll be talking to you again soon. And I remember now, at the beginning I said I would explain my name. I should have probably already done that, but Purify Weird Soul is from Valkyrie Profile. It's a JRPG that came out in 2000, and it's basically what they call the supers in that game. What's funny about it is it's like an English screen that pops up in the middle of the battle after you've filled up your meter, and it says, step on it, press button, Purify Weird Soul, ! It's really funny, and that's why my name is Purify Weird Soul, PWS. I came up with that in like 2003, and I've been using it ever since. But yeah, so you probably know way more about me than you bargained for. But thank you for listening, and I'll close out this first episode with the very ending of Voyage of Promise from Mega Driver. And again, please check them out. The whole album is great. They have some really good Bloodlines tracks. And speaking of, you can listen to the Bloodlines tracks and this one Bloodstained song, and they really seem like they fit together. You can really tell that there's some very similar pieces composition-wise there. It sounds like Michiru is going back to her roots a little bit with that work, maybe. But yep, nice talking to you, and hopefully we'll do this again soon. Peace out, guys. Thanks.